Welcome everyone to our 17th annual Futaba Memorial Lectures. Dr. Bloom, of course, sends his regards to everybody. He wanted to try to make it today, but just wasn't feeling quite up to it this morning. Client talked with him, and but he does send his best regards and a big shout out. Thank you to our speaker Patricia Masters, for sharing her vast knowledge on this topic. I think we're really very, very fortunate, because without a doubt she's the foremost scholar on the topic of Mary Foster. And so this is kind of a prelude. We're hoping through the Buddha Study Center to help publish her book. That's with editors now, and hopefully that'll be kind of done by the end of the year. And sometime next year there'll be the full story, so to speak, of searching for Mary Foster. Today, you'll be getting a little bit of the beginning and a little bit of the end, right? So the middle is what you'll have to kind of anticipate, right? I'm Dexter Marr. I'm program director for the Buddha Study Center with Honganji. And the Futaba lectures are sponsored by the Honganji Betsuin in conjunction with Dr. Bloom. This year we're holding it here at the Buddha Study Center, not only because of our collaboration with Pat, but because Betsuin was too busy to host us this weekend. So we thank the Buddha Study Center for helping us out to provide a venue for this. This is kind of Mary Foster weekend, also because at the Foster Gardens they're doing reenactments of parts of her life this afternoon and tomorrow. So, and it's free, so if you get your engine all revved up, in Mary Foster this morning, you can make it a whole weekend, kind of thing. So they're having, I have posters kind of, up around, but today's performances are at 3 o'clock, 3:30, and 4 p.m. And it's a costume role playing portraying Drs. William Hildebrand, Mary Foster, and Dr. Harold Lyon, and kind of talking about botanical types of things. So and it's free. So you can get into Foster Gardens for free. You only pay $3. So today, of course, we want to give a shout out to Dr. Bloom for starting the Futaba lectures, and we're going to continue the tradition as long as we can. It takes a village to make these things happen. So we want to thank Reverend Hagio and the folks at the Betsuin, Stacy Bradshaw, and then the folks here at the Buddha Study Center, Reverend Kuniyuki and Jamie Itazuki and Carrie Wong. They were instrumental in setting up the room and the cameras and all that sort of thing. A shout out to my wife Faye for all her help in all the operational things that make you feel comfortable and welcome. Okay? And then Al and myself, trying to kind of keep this thing going. Okay? So our program schedule today, starts out with kind of the early years, the first couple of chapters of the book, trying to give you some background of this important person. Actually, September 21st, International Peace Day, was Mary Foster's 172nd birthday. So just last week, I mean, how ironic is that, right? So this Buddhist pioneer, from the late 1800s, born on the day that was chosen as International Peace Day in Hawaii. Okay, so yeah, this is a really nice time, to spend a few hours, kind of thinking about her and her legacy and her role, in Hawaii, because she, as Pat will tell you, was a playmate of Queen Liliuokalani. And then in her later life, she was a very, very good friend of our own Bishop Wayne Imamura, who was instrumental in a lot of Honganji history. Probably wouldn't be here without her involvement and support in Honganji. She was one of the earliest supporters, especially from the Hawaii community. And so I think without further ado, we will begin our search for Mary Foster. This is Dr. Patricia Masters. She's on the staff at University of Hawaii. I think her bio is in the material. And but she's been kind of on this path for 30 years? 50 years. No, the Mary Foster path. 20 years. Just 20. Dropping the bucket. Okay, so yeah.
I really do want to do a shout out about this. This is the 4th year that we're doing it. I'm on the board at the Foster Gardens. I got on the board because I wanted to see what they knew about Mary Foster, and they didn't know anything. So I wrote a grant to the mayor's office to put this together and hired Victoria Newble to write the script. She's a fabulous writer if you've read anything she's written. And so this is going to be this is the 4th year that we're presenting it. I'm going to host it tomorrow. So if you have the time, please go over. If you have the time to actually call and reserve, it's better. But because sometimes it sells out. But I would definitely take the opportunity and go because it's remarkable. It really is remarkable. And it's talking about 3 important people: Mary Foster herself, Dr. William Hillebrand, who was the physician to the royal family under Queen Liliuokalani, well, even before Liliuokalani with Kalakaua, and Harold Lyon Arboretum. And their story together is quite lovely. So if you have the chance, I'd say please go. The last time I presented at the Buddhist Study Center, I had to lie on the floor over here because I had fallen and I pushed a disc into my sciatic nerve root, so I had to have surgery. But I was lying on the floor with the microphone like this and presented. I don't know if anybody was here, but it was pretty crazy. So this morning I woke up with a frog in my throat. So something is happening, and thanks to Aiko, she gave me Fisherman's Friend, so I can, and I might be just taking them as I go along so that I can keep talking. So I wanted to start with 5 fast, fun facts, just to sort of stimulate your imagination. So the first is Mary Foster was part Native Hawaiian. Her mother was from the chiefs of Maui, and her father was a British shipwright, a carpenter. And she was very, very close friends. I probably shouldn't say best friends, I don't know, but she was pretty close friends with Queen Liliuokalani, and I'm going to talk about their relationship in the second half. Her younger sister was Victoria Ward, Ward Estate, Ward Warehouse, Ward everything. And people know about her more than they do about Mary Foster. Her brother was Mark Robinson, Robinson Estate, very big land holdings. Not the Robinsons of Kauai and Ni'ihau, although James Robinson, her father, had 2 children from a previous marriage, and the son went to Kauai at the same time as the Robinsons of Ni'ihau, so they must have been good friends. I can't find records, but I'm pretty sure if there are 2 Robinsons on one small island, they must know each other. Then the third is that Mary Foster had a long and deep friendship with Bishop Yamyo Imamura, and helped pave the way, I think, to allow Japanese Buddhism to thrive in the larger community. People were a little bit kind of, they didn't know what this was all about, the Christian community here, and so they were a little skeptical, thinking it might be a cult. And she did so much to sort of open up the spaces for people to understand what Japanese Buddhism was about. And she loved Imamura-san, just loved him. So she brought Queen Liliuokalani, to a Gotanye service at the Honganji Temple, and the Queen's appearance was recorded all over the world. People all over the world knew about it through newspapers, through telegrams, And it really sort of gave the temple and Hawaii sort of a different kind of international kind of understanding, if you will. And then also, Mary Foster is quite highly regarded, revered in fact, by the people of Sri Lanka and India for the work that she's done in those two countries and throughout South and Southeast Asia. And yet she's so little known here. So little known here. So I just wanted to sort of stimulate you with those little 5 fast, fun facts. So Dexter's been so wonderful in helping me. I really hope you appreciate what you have in Dexter and Faye, because they really are doing some incredible work here. I just really appreciate them a lot. And so when we sat down to talk about how we might approach this today, he came up with this idea. Let's divide it into the years of discovery and then the years of years of transformation, if you will. So the years of discovery include Sarnath, India, the Mulaganda Kuti temple there, Honolulu, Hawaii, and then Bodh Gaya, India. Those are the places, the spaces we're going to be talking about, the sites. And you'll understand more as I go along. So who is Mary Foster? And how did I come to even get interested in her? Well, in October of 1996, exactly 20 years ago, I was in Bodh Gaya teaching for an American university there, teaching Buddhist studies, and I decided to take the students to Benares, Varanasi, Kashi, the city of lights, the most important spiritual site for Hindus. It's where the Ganges is, where everybody wants to be cremated and thrown in. And so we went to Varanasi, and I decided to leave and go to Sarnath, which is about 30 minutes outside of Varanasi. And as I got there, I went to the temple that was the site of the first teachings of the Buddha. And this is the temple. It's the Mulaganda Kuti Vihara, it's called. And I walked up the steps. It's not a very big temple and very kind of subdued, not very elaborate like some of the temples around it. The Bhutanese temple, the Tibetan temple, very, sort of colorful. This is sandstone and quite sort of subdued. And I got to the front door, and on the front door was this plaque, and it says, the Mulaganda Kuti Vihara was erected by the Anagarika Dharmapala, who I'll talk about in a minute, the founder and general secretary of the Mahabodhi Society, with the help of Mrs. Mary Elizabeth Foster of Honolulu. And I was like, what? So I went inside and I found the monk there, a Sri Lankan monk, and I talked to him and I said, okay, I'm from Honolulu and I don't know who Mary Foster is. And he said, madam, you must be knowing her. And I was like, okay, I must. So when I left India and I came back to Honolulu, I started to do my exploration of Mary Foster. So how did I start? I went to the archives, naturally, and I found her birth certificate. Actually, I found 27 boxes of her personal papers. Mostly financial papers, but also personal correspondences. I'm sorry, it's hard to read. We tried to bring it up, but it's hard to read. And this was her birth certificate. And it sort of gave me a little bit of an insight. It told me who her father was. Her father was James Robinson from Portfleet, London. And her mother was Rebecca Previer from Maui. And she was born on September 21st, 1844, at home. At home meaning Pakaka. And Pakaka is down where Aloha Tower is now. And I'll be telling you a little bit about Pakaka. It's quite an interesting story. So, so I started looking more into her family. So her family, the family Robinson, consists of her father, her mother, and 9 children. Her father was James Robinson, as I said, and he was a carpenter who came to Hawaii in 1820. And he beat the missionaries by 2 weeks. And he was very proud to say that, because he wasn't fond of the missionaries at all. But he married a woman named Charlotte, who was Native Hawaiian. I can't find very much about her, but I found out about their 2 children. And she was full Native Hawaiian, and she died early on in their marriage. And in 1843, he married Rebecca Kaikilani Prever, and her name was actually Previer, but her father shortened it to Prever so that people could pronounce it better. And she was the daughter of a full Native Hawaiian woman and a Frenchman who came to Hawaii, jumped ship, and stayed, and became very, very akamai at finding out what people's needs were. So he lived in Maui, and her mother had been hanai'd to a chief on the Big Island. And the chief was tired of all the fighting that was going on all over the Big Island. So he took his family on a small boat, and they went from the Big Island to Maui. And along the way, the boat capsized. And the legend is, their Amakua was a shark. And a group of sharks came and surrounded them and helped them get to the shore of Maui. So it's quite an amazing legend, and whatever truth there is to it, it's a nice story. So she was raised in Maui. So James Robinson, he's a pretty important character. So he came over 1820, and he really liked it. Honolulu was not like it is today. It was a kind of dusty town where whaling ships had been coming in, and there had just been this whole slew of people coming in and sort of taking all the sandalwood, and lots of things were happening. It was a time of great change in Hawaii, and he liked what he saw. And so he went out on a ship called the Hermes, and the Hermes met up with a ship called the Pearl, and they were going towards Japan because they were still interested in whales and whale oil, because it would bring a lot of money. And the ship crashed on the reef, and so did the Pearl. And they crashed within a mile of each other, but they didn't even know that each other was having difficulties until the next morning, and they saw the 2 shipwrecks. So James Robinson took it upon himself to get a bunch of the people on the ship to build a new schooner, a small schooner, from the wreckage of the 2 ships. There were 57 sailors that day. And then finally, a British ship came and asked if they wanted to leave. Obviously they did. So all but 12 went with this British ship back to London. So James Robinson and 11 others sailed that ship back to Honolulu. They called the ship the Deliverance, and it was. And when they got to Honolulu, they sold it. They sold it for $2,000, which was a lot of money at that time. And James Robinson and his good friend Bobby Lawrence took that money and invested it in a property down on the beach near where Aloha Tower is. And it was called Pakaka Point. Pakaka Point became the place that the James Robinson Shipbuilding Company came to be. And it was there until 1925 when it was torn down so that the pier could be built. And so James and his friend, Bobby Lawrence, started this amazing shipbuilding and ship repair business right there on the beach over by Aloha Tower. Excuse me. And then he met Rebecca Prever, and asked her father, wrote a letter to her father asking for her hand in marriage. And her father, Jean-Baptiste Previer, said, it's up to my daughter. If my daughter wants to, then okay. So very unusual for that period, yeah? Very unusual for a lot of periods. Anyway, so he asked his daughter, and she said yes. And so they married, and they came over to Honolulu. And they had a living space at the top in the loft of the Pakaka building. The Pukaka building is very distinct, and you've probably seen photographs if you looked at any archival photographs of that period. It was a building that had sort of step gabled roof, and it was the only one, and it's right on the beach in Waikiki, well, in downtown. So if you've ever seen old photographs, or if you do see old photographs from that period now, you can recognize the Pukaka building. Now the Pukaka building is an interesting one because it was placed in an area that used to be an old fort. And this fort was built by the French. The French came and asked the king if they could have this little plot of land to build some buildings on. And instead, they built a fort with cannons. And so the king said, no. So he came and he made them leave, and they went off to Kauai, actually, and built a fort over on Kauai. And instead, the fort was left, and it was right next to an old heiau. And this was a very special heiau. It was the one where chiefs would gather, and they would play konani, which is a game. And it had a very sort of somber feeling to it, other than the makahiki sort of game playing that went on there. There were skulls of people that they had killed in the heiau. And so when James Robinson got there, it was a little bit daunting. So what he did was he asked a kahuna to come and to bless the space before he built Pukaka building. And they cleared the land of all of that energy, and he never had a problem. And the people started to call him Kimo Pukaka. Kimo meaning James, and Pukaka for the place. So that became his name to the Native Hawaiians. And because he was married to a Native Hawaiian woman, he was very, very concerned about what was going on. Pre-contact, right before contact, there were over 400,000 Native Hawaiians in Hawaii. And by the time James Robinson built his Pukaka building, there were 40,000. So a lot of the Native Hawaiians were decimated by venereal disease, by smallpox, by other things that they had no immune systems for. And so he was quite concerned about this and really wanted to protect the Native Hawaiians. So he had 9 children. Mary Elizabeth Mika Robinson Foster was born September 21st, 1844, in Pukaka, in the loft of that building. And her mother had this feeling about her being a very special baby, and she used to have the kahuna lapa'au come and to do prayers with her for this was her first child, and to see how this birth was going to turn out. Well, she turned out to be a feisty, healthy, beautiful baby. And then James Robinson built a house for the new family that he was beginning. And he built it up on, you know where Oahu Cemetery is? Okay, right behind Oahu Cemetery is a lane called Robinson Lane. And the place where it's a Japanese, let me think of what the name of it is. Which one? Tenrikio Cultural Center is now right on Nu'uanu and Robinson Lane. He built their first house. And the house was quite stunning. They used to call it the old homestead. And people remarked at how beautiful and airy it was, and how they had taken into account the winds from the pali, and how the house just welcomed people. And so all of the other children were born in that house, except for Mary Foster, Mary Mikahala. And so the births came rather quickly. So her sister was born 2 years after Mary Foster, Victoria Ward. And then her next sister, Aunt Batty. Now it's a cute name, I wonder what it meant. Whether she was Batty, or whether it's just because people couldn't remember Bathsheba, which was quite difficult to pronounce, I think, for a lot of people. And she's quite an amazing character herself. Every one of the children really went on to become quite amazing residents and people in the community. And Aunt Batty never had any children. Victoria Ward had 7 daughters, and you may have heard of the Ward sisters, and you know, if you grew up here, I'm sure you heard of them because they were sort of cloistered in their house that covered the area from Ward and King all the way down to the ocean, and they also had the fishing rights off of that area. Ward and King, and then all the way over to Keamoku. Huge property, huge property. And 7 daughters. Bathsheba had none, but she was the favorite auntie to everybody. And during the years, she and her husband hosted or even took in different members of the family at different times. Their house was where the YWCA stands on Richard Street now. And it was an amazing structure, and big, and just accommodated everybody. They were lovely people as well. The next sister was Matilda. Each child was born about 2 years after. Matilda was sort of the fun one, very quiet but very funny, they say. Then came Mark Prever Robinson, who's very, very highly known. He was part of Lily Okalani's cabinet, if you will, and then after the overthrow, he was part of the provisional government until he realized what they were doing. And because he was part Native Hawaiian, he dropped off after a little less than a year. Very amazing businessman. To this day, the Mark Robinson estate is one of the biggest land holdings in Hawaii. Then came Robert, and he died after 1 year. And then came Annie, who they called Waddy. I don't know why Waddy, can't find out why. And then came Lucy. Lucy married McWayne. Do you remember McWayne's, the marine company down on Ward? That was their place. And they were also ship repair people. And I met Lucy's great-grandson, Alan. He comes back and forth between here and Oregon, and a lot of my data on the family comes from him. He let me he lives at 1 Kalakaua when he's here, and his mother does too, but she doesn't see people, so I didn't get to meet her yet. And so he took me to his apartment and showed me Mary Foster's Bible. It was so lovely that he inherited Mary Foster's Bible, and it was so cute. He took out white gloves and went into this very special closet, took it out, and opened it very carefully, and showed me where she had signed her name and all of that. It was quite stunning. Part of this research has been so much fun because it's kind of like a spy game, It's like finding all these different clues, and it's interesting because the family doesn't really have very much information. And I don't know what happened. I really don't know. Mary Foster never had children, but she left a huge estate, and a lot of it went to her nephews and nieces, her brothers, her sisters, but a lot of it went to her Buddhist sort of interests, and also to different charitable organizations that I'm going to talk about in a minute. So what was it like when she was growing up? So early Mary Foster was kind of, whaling was just on the outs. They found that the whales were leaving and they were going to other parts. Agriculture, and particularly sugar, was beginning. There's a saying that the missionaries came to do good and they did well. So a lot of it was that they bought a lot of land and they introduced sugar. And the Native Hawaiians, already feeling burned from having to deforest their sandalwood, refused to work on the plantations. So they had to import people. And a very interesting story about that. David Kalakaua, in 1888, went to Japan and met the Meiji Emperor and talked about inhabiting Hawaii. And he felt this kinship, which it turns out, Dennis Ogawa tells me, is actually true. Some blood kinship between the Japanese and Native Hawaiians. So, never knew that. So King Kalakaua asks the Meiji Emperor, they're going through some hard times in Japan at that point, The Satsuma Rebellion had just happened, and a lot of the samurai were really angry about the opening up of Japan by the Meiji government. They wanted to stay with the traditional Japanese life. Of course, it benefited them. That was partially why. But they didn't like the idea of this whole westernization that was taking place. So they got together. This was on Kyushu, and they created this rebellion against the government. And they were defeated. And so the Meiji emperor was happy to see them go. So he offered to send the samurai and the farmers from Kyushu particularly, and then later from Hiroshima, to Hawaii to help re-inhabit the Hawaiian Islands. However, it turned out that Kalakaua, when he came back, was losing power. Oh, the other thing was that Kalakaua offered Princess Kaiulani to the Meiji Emperor for his son. Unfortunately, the Meiji Emperor said no. And Kaiulani, as we know, died very young. So, excuse me, so when Kalakaua came back, he was finding that his power was being eroded by these haole businessmen and missionaries, and he couldn't keep his promise to the Meiji Emperor to make sure that the people who were coming were treated well. And they ended up on the plantations not treated well. And I think he regretted a lot. Not that he brought them in there, but that he couldn't do anything to save them. Their life was very, very strong. And there began to be stratification within the society. You, of course, had the Hawaiian royalty and the elites. Then you had the missionaries who had a lot of power, both monetarily and in terms of the spiritual life of the people. And then you had businessmen who came as merchants. And then you had sea captains and other merchants. And then you had native Hawaiians, the Maka'ainana, who were inhabiting the space. And, excuse me. And so people interacted, but there was definitely social stratification. And so where did Mary Foster's family fit in this? Her mother was an ali'i. However, her father was a haole. And he was a sea captain. So they ended up in the position of aligning themselves with sea captains and merchants. And that had an impact. Because as a child, they were also very close to the royals. James Robinson was great friends with John Young. If you remember, John Young was a very important person in the Hawaiian community, and he was the grandfather of Queen Emma. And so Mary Foster and Emma and Lydia Paki, who later became Queen Liliuokalani, were friends. And so the Liliuokalani and Mary Foster used to play at Queen Emma's summer palace as children. So, anyway, so this period was very sort of informative. Mary Foster wasn't really taken with the whole missionary project. She had questions, she had doubts. She was really curious about things. You know, she really wanted to know about spirit. She writes a letter to Liliuokalani saying, I'm so hungry to understand spirituality, and I find no comfort in my Christian sort of learnings. So she's part Native Hawaiian, she's part haole, so that gives her a kind of particular place in Hawaiian society at the time. She was totally interested in her Native Hawaiian side. She wanted to study Huna, but it was not allowed. It had to be kept very secret. Huna is the healing and spiritual system of the Native Hawaiians, right? So her father wanted to do something, you know, and so he got together with a lot of the merchants and the sea captains, and they created a school called the Charity School. Now, it wasn't a charity school in terms of, you know, being a place where people who were poor and needed to go went. That was just the name of it. The Charity School allowed the Hapa Haole, Hapa Hawaiian kids mostly, who were married to these sea captains and these merchants, a place They weren't, of course, allowed in the royal school, even though a lot of them were royalty. They weren't really welcomed in the mission school, and they didn't want to go because the mission schools, everything was taught in Hawaiian. So the kids were not learning English. And it was a way, I think, of the missionaries keeping those people down. They translated the Bible into Hawaiian, and they taught them Hawaiian. They didn't teach them maths and social studies and science and all of those things. They taught them the Bible. So James Robinson and a number of very prominent merchants and sea captains opened this school. And they had hired 2 former missionaries who were also unhappy about the fact that the missionaries were teaching only in Hawaiian. So they came over and offered to teach in this charity school. So the school opened in early on, I think in 1843, and before Mary Foster was born. And she ended up going there. And then the school took another direction, and James Robinson moved the kids over to a school on 4th Street, and then a lot of the children ended up going to Punahou. And so her beginnings were with a kind of open English language education. So again, she had relationships with the royals. But again, there were different social strata. And again, she had this great friendship with Liliuokalani. And she had this growing concern for her native Hawaiian people because she saw what was happening and the decimation that was taking place. And then she was a very sort of curious person. She was interested in spirituality, very questioning, very curious, and just started really exploring all different sort of spiritual practices. This is a picture of her at 16, and quite a lovely young woman, and just quite interested in everything. Her father taught her business. She had a great mind and an acumen for business, so he taught her about his business, his shipbuilding business and his land acquisition business. Now, she was a child at the time of the Great Mahele. Anybody not know what the Mahele was? We all know. It brought private property to Hawaii for the first time. It was instigated by haole businessmen who wanted to buy land. And it was supposed to be structured so that the greatest portion of the land still went to the native Hawaiians. However, what happened in the process was that those lands, because the native Hawaiians didn't understand private property ownership and leaseholds and all these things, they got ripped off. So they lost a lot of their land. So Mary Foster's father started buying land. And then later, her husband, who she married on April 4th, 1861, at the age of 16, she married Thomas Foster. Quite an interesting man, born in Nova Scotia, and a lot older than she. And actually, 1861 is not his birthday, 1831, sorry. 1831, sorry. And he came to Hawaii in 1855. And he worked for Mary Foster's father, and was quite interested in the whole shipping business, and started looking into inter-island shipping. There hadn't been too much of it taking place, and he also created a mail service. And he ended up starting the Inter-Island Navigation Company, which took goods and mail to all the different neighbor islands. So they were very happily married, but he died young. He died at the age of 59 in San Francisco. They were on holiday, and he got very sick, and he passed away. But during his life, he and Mary's father decided to buy land on the windward side. They found Kahana Bay, and Kahana Bay was a very sort of welcoming bay for them to bring small ships in to take the produce from the farmers on the windward side. Kahana Valley was all rice and taro and all of that, and other vegetables. And so the farmers were so happy because they could get their produce to market quickly. So they bought some land right in the front of Kahana Bay, and Mary Foster actually built a house right on Kahana Bay. And then when she started seeing what was happening to the Native Hawaiians in Kahana Bay, she made an effort to start buying plots or leasing plots from the Native Hawaiians there who were getting ripped off, and allowing them to stay on their land. And so by the time she died in 1930, she owned 99% of Kahana Valley and allowed the Native Hawaiians to stay on that land. And a lot of their families are still in those same houses in that valley. The other 1% was actually bought up by her nephew, who was her financial advisor.